No one is talking about the hidden sleep disorders. A lot of times they keep going back to their psychiatrist and they keep getting their medication changed, a dose increased, and then all of a sudden, next thing they're taking 5 different antidepressants, which none of them are making any meaningful difference in their life. They're still tired, they're still sleepy. Majority of these sleep disorders, they start in second decade of life. So they'll start in teenage years or when I'm in my 20s. Something in the brain is not letting you feel alert and awake. It could be a hormone missing that your brain is supposed to generate and it's not generating because those neurons somehow get destroyed, and there are multiple mechanisms behind that. So even though I am awake, but I'm barely awake and I'm never really 100% there. And so that switch may be broken or malfunctioning, and those are the hidden sleep disorders.
Welcome to the Hidden Sleep Disorder Show, where we uncover the medical conditions that often hide behind chronic fatigue, poor sleep, and unexplained exhaustion. Millions of people wake up every morning feeling tired, even after what seems like a full night of sleep. And many people are told that the problem is stress, lifestyle, or simply not getting enough rest. But in many cases, the real reason is actually something far less obvious. Could be an undiagnosed sleep disorder. So in this show, we sit down with the sleep specialist, Dr. Vishal Saini, to explore the science, diagnosis, and treatment of sleep disorders most people do not even realize that they may have. So if you've ever wondered why sleep doesn't seem to fix their exhaustion, today's episode is the perfect place to start. And I know I'm excited for this because I feel like that's talking to me. So, Dr. Sani, are you ready to kick off this show? How are
I
you
am.
today?
Cannot wait, Leila. Thank you for having me. This is super exciting.
Absolutely. I know so many people feel like they sleep and don't feel rested. And I know currently I'm one of those people. So I'm excited to dive into this. And before we dive fully into sleep disorders themselves, I'd love to really start with your journey. So what originally drew you into the field of sleep medicine, and what really made you decide that this was the area of medicine that you wanted to really focus on?
That's a great question. And, I did not really get into, so to speak, into sleep medicine up until my residency. Typically when I was doing medical school, there wasn't a whole lot of stress on the sleep medicine aspect of things or even sleep disorders. So barely, there would be a little touch here and there about sleep disorders, but nothing that would, make me realize that, hey, it's a whole sort of its own world out there that I should be exploring. So, but when I was doing my residency in Springfield, Illinois, and this is, I'm talking about, I'm probably going to age myself out between 2010 and 2013. So in those years, we were taking care of a patient in our hospital. And this is sort of what made it also kind of personal to me because, as a resident, you're in charge of making sure that your patient is getting well, they're getting discharged from the hospital. But this particular patient, no matter what we did, this patient's always crashing at nighttime. Their oxygen's dropping like crazy. And yes, given they had all kinds of multiple comorbid conditions, you name it, diabetes, morbid obesity, hypertension, spinal fracture, COPD, they had sort of a full plate. But still, most people, they start the hospital stay and within few days they get better and they go home. But this particular individual stayed with us for several weeks, and we just could not figure out a way to make him feel better. And that's when we realized that, hey, there is a massive amount of sleep apnea burden that this guy is dealing with. At nighttime, he crashes and we're getting pages and no one can sleep. So that's really opened my eyes as to, hey, how impactful this sleep piece is. And so I started exploring it more. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. And not that I know too much about sleep disorders, but in dealing with certain clients, I've learned a little bit about that. And I think what you said about it kind of being its own world is just very, very accurate. There's so much within the sleep field that a lot of people don't tend to think about. It's
That's
almost
right.
like not a top of mind thing. And then the more that I'm learning about it from my end, it's shocking how,
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Leila, when I got interested, obviously I did not know the full scope of sleep disorders or sleep medicine. So I asked my mentors, my program director, to see if I could go explore and do an elective for just a 1 month sort of rotation with sleep medicine experts who were living the life of a sleep medicine expert back then. And luckily, I was able to find a spot at Stanford University Sleep Disorders Program. And I think I'm grateful. I feel blessed that I was able to see and meet the founding fathers of sleep medicine in America, namely Dr. William Dement, who has passed away since, Dr. Christian Gimino, CG, we used to call him with, affectionately. He's moved on as well. But these were the pillars of sleep medicine. They're still considered pillars, and we still use their research, so we're standing on shoulders of those giants. So that was a very sort of, that made it very personal and appealing to me when I had that sort of exposure. I was also able to, witness and work in the clinic for narcolepsy at Stanford, which is where Dr. Minio, who's considered the world's narcolepsy authority on this, and I was able to closely see and sort of that passion rubbed on me, I think, and I'm glad it did. So I was grateful for that opportunity. But that's really what steered my career path into sleep medicine and sort of made my choice that okay, this is probably what I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
Absolutely. And I know that many physicians kind of have that moment or experience that really shapes their career path. And this may have been what you just mentioned, but was there anything else that comes to mind, or maybe a particular patient experience or moment early in your career that made you realize how truly important sleep medicine was? I know you touched on it right now, but was there anything else that really comes to mind?
So, yes, actually, quite a few then. Once you start looking for this under the cover, then the more you look, it's like a rabbit hole. The more you look, the more you find. And then once I did that elective and then went back to doing my own clinics, and I started realizing how often that this piece is not being talked about and generally for our patients. And that was one thing I was hoping to achieve through this podcast, is to be actually the voice of our patients and to be able to share their stories through our conversations here, and to make sure that folks who are on the fence or they don't really know that they might be dealing with sleep disorders, is to give them sort of a platform to realize that okay, hey, I might be dealing with the sleep disorder myself. So having said that, I used to take care of patients who had diabetes, who had hypertension, and a lot of times at the end of the visit, these folks are telling us, oh, by the way, doctor, I'm also tired. Or, oh, by the way, doctor. So usually it's, oh, by the way, conversations that they're having at the end of the visit. But, in an era of fast-paced medicine where, the time is limited, right? We're not able to spend hours and hours with our patients. So then those conversations, you have to really have a pretty high suspicion to be able to catch those. But these patients are out there telling, providers, whether you're a psychiatrist, whether you're a primary care doctor, any specialty, even cardiology, nephrology, you name it, it impacts every single person. So it's very, very broad. And once you realize that, you start to envision and you start to see it everywhere.
Absolutely. And I think one of the big questions most people have is, how is it possible for someone to sleep 7 or 8 hours and still just wake up feeling exhausted?
That really hits the nail on the head. And I cannot tell you, that's probably the most frequently asked question in the practice that I get. It's like, okay, it doesn't make any sense, especially when you do not have, for example, a lot of patients get told, oh, you don't have sleep apnea, go home, and there's nothing wrong with you. Hey, that could not be farther from the truth. Okay, so I would suggest that do not take that for an answer and keep exploring with And if your sleep provider or sleep clinician is not willing to go or dig further, then you probably need someone else to do that on your behalf. But how is it possible? And there are multiple pathways that could be doing it, and we'll explore those as we go forward as to what these different conditions do. But it's not uncommon for us to see this, even though your original sleep study is negative for sleep apnea, because a lot of times people equate that, okay, if I'm tired, I must have sleep apnea, and if I don't have sleep apnea, then I don't have any other sleep disorder, right? So it's not only about sleep apnea, which can be a major factor, and we always rule that out too, but there are so much more to it outside of just your snoring or sleep apnea.
So I think it's definitely the most common one that people hear of or know of. And I'm not sure why. I guess it is maybe one of the most common ones, or where people kind of start to dive into that. But that's the one that I think comes to mind when people think about.
Oh, absolutely. And, thanks to all the awareness that's being spread by, let's say either American Academy of Sleep Medicine or National Institute of Health. So you are right. There's so much literature and awareness talking about sleep apnea. And yes, it is one of the most common sleep disorders that we deal with as a sleep clinician in our daily life. And in fact, there, by some estimates, there it's close to 100 to 250 million people who suffer from obstructive sleep apnea just in the US. And there's one estimate for around the globe, about 1 billion people might be dealing with this condition. So these are massive numbers, right?
Mm-hmm. And I could be completely wrong, but from what I've been learning about sleep disorders and things like that, is it's the most common because it's often linked to obesity, and there's obviously an obesity problem, and especially in America. So is that why do you think it's like the most common for the most part?
No, I don't think so. Obesity, yes, it has obviously made the problem worse, but we see it in non-obese individuals too. We see also, another misconception is that, hey, it's a problem for mostly men. But after menopause, the risk for sleep apnea in women doubles. And we're seeing this even in younger, skinnier individuals where we would have never expected or suspected this problem, but it's showing up in all kinds of different populations. Some populations, for example, people of Asian origin, or they may be very skinny, but their genetics, their facial features put them at much higher risk for sleep apnea or sleep disorder breathing. Sometimes we use those terms interchangeably.
Wow, that is so interesting. And thinking about what most people think about sleep, most people think about sleep in terms of hours, right? So can you kind of explain the difference between sleep quantity and sleep quality, and why are both so important for restorative sleep?
And that's an absolutely relevant question. Sleep quantity is basically what determines naturally, and it is partly determined by my genes too. Okay, so your genetic makeup tells you how many hours are you gonna be sleeping. So there is part of that you cannot change, basically, right? But then it's also driven by our environment. If my sleep environment is really poor, or if it's really good, that will impact my total sleep time. And a lot of times patients will ask us that, doc, I'm sleeping 6-7 hours, but I read in this magazine or that news article that I should be getting 8 hours of sleep. Is that true? And the answer is no. That is not. We're not looking or after just one number. It's very individual based. I will quote a long-term study on a population-based study where they looked at. It's an epidemiological study where they're looking at trends across the whole general population. So they looked at all the working age adults in America, and they found out that total sleep time for that cohort was 6 hours 50 minutes. So that 8 hours, I'm not sure where that came from, but generally if you are working in America in this day and age, you're lucky to get 6 hours and 50 minutes. Now that doesn't mean that's enough for you. right? So because all these different factors are going to come into play. So but it's safe to assume that, hey, if you're getting somewhere between 6 hours 45 minutes to almost 7 hour 45-minute mark, then you are pretty much in a big chunk of average patients that generally, or even population that they would get. Now obviously there are always long sleepers who need way more sleep than most, and then there are short sleepers as well who only need 5 hours of sleep, for example, and they feel awesome after 5 hours. So that is, as far as quantity of sleep goes, so it can be a variable. So don't get too hung up on just one number, because I know I have patients who will come back and they're just chasing this 8 hour mark, and that's actually making things worse for them because they're trying to get more sleep, trying to get more sleep. And generally, consensus is sleep is a tricky thing. The more you try to get it, the less you're going to get it. So in a way, I tell my patients to try less, and hey, take a step back and just let the things naturally come to you.
Absolutely.
Now, how is sleep quality, considered a part of this? Now, sleep quality is obviously very, very important. And a lot of our insomnia patients will complain about this, that, hey, even though I'm in the bed 9 hours, I'm sleeping 7 hours, but I do not feel rested. I do not feel like I'm getting into any deep sleep. And there's another misconception there, that a lot of people think that, hey, dream sleep is somehow deep sleep. And they'll come to us like, hey, I don't even dream. Am I even getting deep sleep? And so there are, sleep is divided when we do these sleep studies into distinct stages. Generally, I'll name them just for reference. Stage 1 and 2 are considered light sleep stages. Stage 3 is considered a deep sleep stage. And then the fourth stage is called REM sleep or REM sleep, which is where a lot of dreaming is happening. But my brain is pretty active. In fact, when we are looking at the brain waves during sleep study, it's almost as active in REM sleep, while compared to awake, they look very similar. Okay, so REM sleep is, even though it is a dream state sleep, but I wouldn't call it the deepest sleep. Okay, so deep sleep is something different. And as I'm getting older, our brains tend to lose the capacity of generating deep sleep. And that's something we are finding more and more when we do these sleep studies, that, hey, your brain is no longer making any deep sleep. So I have, pretty much every single day I run into a case where their deep sleep is zero. But, these are some of the things you would never find out without really getting a very comprehensive sleep testing and evaluation.
Absolutely. And I even, going back to the amount of hours, I know for me, and I'm sure for everyone, you think, oh, I'm exhausted, I want to sleep, I'm gonna, maybe I have this day off, I'm gonna sleep as much as I can, and you wake up and you feel worse. You're like, how can I sleep for 8-10 hours or whatever it is, and think that you're catching up on sleep, and you wake up feeling super exhausted.
Exactly.
So, and it is different for everyone.
That's right. And, you touched on this. So we sort of classify these patients into our hypersomnia patients category. Okay, so insomnia is where, hey, I have difficulty falling asleep, I have difficulty staying asleep. And at the opposite end is what we call hypersomnia, where no matter how much I'm sleeping, I'm still exhausted. I'm still feeling tired, just like you said. And then we have to look for very different sort of set of sleep disorders. We call them central disorders of hypersomnia, which basically means something in the brain is not letting you feel alert and awake. Now, it could be a hormone missing that your brain is supposed to generate and it's not generating because those neurons somehow get destroyed, and there are multiple mechanisms behind that. Or even though you're awake, think of it as a light bulb where you could turn up or turn down the intensity, so that light bulb never reaches the full intensity, so I never feel fully awake in that sense. So even though I am awake, but I'm barely awake, and I'm never really 100% there. And so that switch may be broken or malfunctioning. So those are and those are the hidden hidden sleep disorders, which as a sleep physician make our life interesting and exciting to sort of diagnose those or uncover those.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that is so interesting. And I think that a lot of people kind of use the words fatigue or sleepiness interchangeably, right? But what is the difference between fatigue and excessive daytime sleepiness? And why is it that distinction is so important in sleep medicine?
It's extremely important, Leila, and this is the question I ask every individual who comes to me who reports that I am sleepy or I'm tired. And most commonly, people use the word tired because, for some reason in our culture, being sleepy is not looked upon very well. But if you're tired, then everyone thinks, oh my gosh, you must be working really, really hard, right? So being tired is a trophy, but being sleepy is a curse. That's a common saying in our field, okay? So I asked this question, to pretty much every single patient that, okay, are you really tired or are you sleepy or both? And then they pause and they have to think about it before they actually answer. And now, so how we try to distinguish between tiredness and sleepiness is, are there instances where you just want to close your eye or you accidentally doze off where you didn't really intend to, for example in a boring meeting or a boring movie, right? And the other good example when most of us get drowsy is while driving, especially if it's more than 30 minutes, or if I'm commuting, in NYC, if I'm in a metro or subway, right? So those would be the times where if I have higher propensity, higher risk for falling asleep, or have higher burden of sleepiness, that I might doze off. Now, there are times, and we have patients who feel extremely tired and sleepy, but because they feel terrible after a nap, they're always fighting to not fall asleep because they do not find it helpful. And so they're always, trying to fight it off, and they'll never say I'm sleepy. They'll always say I'm tired. So are there tests for us to sort of help figure this out? Because sometimes it turns into this whole chicken and egg situation where you can never really tell them apart. So that's where some of the sleep testing comes in to help us. And one of those tests we do, it's called a nap study, where we have someone take multiple naps throughout the day that gives them opportunity to fall asleep. And we look for, when their brain falls asleep, how quickly it does that, and if it's entering into any abnormal sleep patterns. So that gives us a pretty good idea that, am I dealing with a sleepy person, or it might be just fatigue. But, I think sleepiness is way more common than we realize, but we sort of keep chalking it up to fatigue and keep blaming all the other conditions to do that. So I'm sure we'll go into that in more detail, but that's generally how I'm trying to figure out whether I'm dealing with a tired person or a sleepy person or someone who has both.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that that's something we'll definitely dive into deeper in future episodes. But I think that's a very good high level way to kind of explain it, because I would have never thought about it that way at all. You kind of think it's all the same. We're not, unless you're in the field, I don't think anyone has that knowledge that they are different, right? And this show is called The Hidden Sleep Disorder Show, right? So what are a few of the hidden sleep disorders that might surprise people because they're actually more common than we really realize?
Hey, that's a great question, and we have a few, which makes our life fairly exciting. So one of them is, whenever I have, from our earlier conversation, you said, hey, I'm always tired, I'm always sleepy. What to do with those patients? Now, there is sort of a big misconception out there that, hey, narcolepsy, which a lot of people think narcolepsy is where, hey, I'm talking to you and then suddenly I'm falling asleep, right? Which the reality is that most narcoleptics do not present that. It's actually a very, very tiny percentage that would be so maladaptive or who would have such a massive burden. But most narcoleptics could easily, pass through as a normal sleeper, even though they have extreme burdens of sleepiness. So that's one condition that is very hidden, because whenever I say narcolepsy, people are thinking about, videos where a kid is laughing and all of a sudden their whole body crashes and they fall down on the floor. But in real life, it's super subtle, and it takes an astute clinician to sort of find it and pinpoint what the exact cause might be. The other hidden sleep disorder that comes to my mind, which we're seeing actually quite commonly now, especially with this whole epidemic of memory loss, dementia, and as our population lives longer and healthier lives longer and longer, we're seeing more dementia and memory loss in our aging population. But the hidden sleep disorder in that population is, we call it REM behavior disorder, or RBD for short, which in simple words, what it is sort of a dream enactment behavior, meaning let's say I'm dreaming about fighting, but I'm actually throwing punches in my sleep. And I've had patients who hit their spouses, they've jumped out of the bed, they've punched a hole in their drywall, they've injured their eyes because they jumped from the bed. So this symptom where they're acting out on those dreams has been linked to later in life dementia. And, almost 40 to 60% of these individuals will start showing these dream behaviors well in advance before the memory changes set in place. So they may have no clue. They may be like, hey, my memory is sharp. I'm really good at, remembering facts. But, these dream enactment behaviors sometimes show up 10 years, 20 years before the actual memory loss or memory changes take place, which can be a scary thought, right? For a partner or for a spouse. But it's better to know in advance and start working towards mitigating some of this versus finding it out that, hey, why didn't I reach out to a sleep doc who could have diagnosed me with this, and while I was just fighting through this all night long by myself.
Absolutely. Now that's so important for people to know, because you can prevent things later in life. Like I'm sure a lot of people are shocked to hear that. I'm shocked because I would have never even thought that those two things are correlated. So it's interesting that, to be aware and pay attention to that, because you could prevent so many things later on in life. And for example, many patients go years without a diagnosis, right? So why are sleep disorders, do you think, so often overlooked, or even why are they misdiagnosed so frequently?
Well, one, they're hard to diagnose, right? You need to have a lot of training, and you need to be suspicious about finding these, like, okay, I may be dealing with a sleep disorder. So some of the delays because of that. But there is also, I commonly see this delay in my sleepy patients or hypersomnia patients who may be dealing with narcolepsy or idiopathic hypersomnia. Those are the two main conditions that generally the delay is at least 20 years. I've read in some literature where, hey, it could take them up to 20 years to just get the diagnosis. Forget about, finding the good treatment. It's just trying to find someone to make that diagnosis. I have a story for you, okay, if you're up for that, okay?
Absolutely.
This is, I've gotten to know this gentleman. He is a retired judge.
Okay.
He's 91 years old.
Wow.
Okay. And he came to see me last year, and his chief complaint was, Doc, I'm extremely sleepy and tired during the daytime, and I feel like I'm just sleeping away, whatever few years I have left. So I dug, deeper, and I was like, okay, how long you been dealing with this? And he says, long time. And generally, judges don't retire, right? You've seen Supreme Court judges, they don't retire. They're always, there for a long, long time. So I was curious, like, okay, Judge, why did you retire? And he said, it got to a point that I could not stay awake, and I had no other option but to retire. So, and this is a very well-educated, high-performing, pretty much at top of their game, right? It's not so easy to become a judge. And even those individuals could be impacted, and it could sort of change your whole life plan, right? Where you may be thinking about working till 75 or 80, but at the age of 60, you're like, hey, I can no longer do this. So it's extremely impactful. So then when we did, testing, the NAP study that I was talking about, guess what we found out? He had narcolepsy, and now we're treating him to manage the symptoms and figure out a good solution for him to live rest of his life in a more meaningful, productive way like he wants to. Okay. But the consequences are real. So, so one thing that I hope my message to our audience would be that, hey, if you are a person who is feeling tired or feeling sleepy, do not just keep blaming your depression. Do not just keep blaming your anxiety. Do not just keep blaming your stressful work. Do not just keep blaming your stress from your family life, or, hey, I have a new kid, so all those things, people are really good at finding excuses. I've learned that when it comes down to explaining what might be causing their sleepiness. And all of us have our theories, but I would challenge everyone to, hey, let's put your theories to test. Let's do some sleep testing and figure it out and make sure we're not missing any sleep disorders that might be hidden.
And I think that that's why this conversation and this entire show is so important, because, for example, you just said, it's easy to don't blame it rather on your depression, on your anxiety. And that's exactly what we all do. Oh, I'm tired, or I haven't been feeling well. And these things I'm sure contribute, but I'm sure that it's not the only thing, right? There's all these disorders that it could be, and no one really thinks about that. No one's mind goes to in that realm. It's always, I worked harder this week, or I'm stressed out about this, or I'm depressed. For example, people who are depressed and depressed people can sleep for hours or not sleep at all, depending how it affects them.
And I'll give you, since we're talking about depression, a lot of times they keep going back to their psychiatrist and they keep getting their medication changed, a dose increased. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, they're taking 5 different antidepressants, which none of them are making any meaningful difference in their life. They're still tired, they're still sleepy, but no one is talking about the hidden sleep disorders. And hey, that's why you and I are talking about.
Absolutely. And I wanted to comment on the story you told about the 91-year-old judge. That's incredible. And I love that even at that age, she finally decided to take that step. I mean, imagine having a new lease on life almost at 91.
Absolutely.
Super
and this
impressive.
is, you're right, it's especially commendable because majority of these sleep disorders, they start in second decade of life. So they'll start in teenage years or when I'm in my 20s. So you can imagine if someone is waiting from their 20th birthday till their 90th birthday, you've already wasted 70 years of your life, So I hope our audience will not waste that much time in getting the help they need.
Absolutely. I'm sure everyone listening is probably thinking about their own sleep, because I know I am. I'm going through my head. Do I have anything going on? So it's so important to shed light on this. And, for example, if leads me into my actual next question about that is, if someone suspects that their sleep, might not be normal, what symptoms or warning signs should really prompt someone to actually go and seek a sleep evaluation?
That's right. And that's a very relevant question to our discussion, because your body will try to tell you this, right? You just have to sort of kind of pay attention to some of these. So how I would break it down is let's break it down into 3 big buckets of sleep disorders, okay? So one set of sleep disorders is where, hey, there's something wrong with my breathing, whether I'm snoring too loud, or I quit breathing in my sleep, or I'm breathing funky, so that's one set of disorders where either your spouse is complaining that how you're so loud and I want to kick you out of my bedroom, which happens a lot though. We call it sleep divorce, and that happens a lot. So that's one set of disorders. And the second set of disorders is where we're dealing with insomnia bucket, where, hey, I have hard time falling asleep or a hard time staying asleep. And these are the folks who will take forever to fall asleep when they first go to bed. They may have a lot of sleep-related anxiety, or it's like, hey, my mind is always racing. I cannot turn it off. Or I wake up in the middle of the night. I go to bed just fine, but after 3 hours, I wake up and then my mind is racing and I can't turn it off. So that's the insomnia bucket. So that's your body trying to tell you that, hey, this is something going on here. Can you pay attention to this, right? And then the third bucket is where I'm dealing with hypersomnia conditions, where I'm tired, I'm fatigued, I'm waking up with headaches in the morning, my mouth is dry in the morning, I'm waking up 3, 4, 5 times to go to the bathroom at nighttime, which I never used to do that. And I used to think that this was only a men problem, but I've ran into women waking up 3, 4, 5 times, and they're, most women, it's much easier to just blame childbirth for everything. It's like, oh, after I had a baby, I stopped sleeping. After I had my baby, I've always been tired ever since. After I had my baby, I've been, going to wake up to pee several times. So all those things are telling us, that, hey, there is something underlying going on here. Let's get tested. Let's get checked out. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's I mentioned I've been learning a lot about sleep disorders from different shows also, but it's interesting you said that about getting up to go to the bathroom several times a night, because I think that's something that is usually linked with men more so than females, and how that can cause sleep disruption as well. And it's all these factors that we just go through on a regular basis that we just think are normal, and it could be something so much deeper.
I'll name a few more since you're talking about hot flashes in women. A lot of women, nighttime sweating, that comes to mind. I'll give you a personal story, okay? It's pretty close to home, okay? I was doing my sleep fellowship, and we just had our first kid, my daughter, she was just born, and my in-laws, my wife's parents, they were visiting us from India, and my father-in-law was rocking the whole house. He was such a loud snore, and I'm like, man, I cannot let this go on. I'm doing sleep fellowship, right? So, but one thing, so one day he woke up in the morning. I'm like, I call him dad too. So like, dad, you're, really rocking the whole house. How long you been doing this? And then I found out that he has really intense acid reflux, and so much so that he had changed his whole diet, and he was avoiding all kinds of food items that he would love and enjoyed in the past, but he could not eat them because every time he would, he thought that there was a big connection between those food items. But he said, I can't sleep because my acid reflux gets really, really bad at nighttime. So what I did was, I said, okay, why don't we do a sleep study on you? We did a simple home test for him. And guess what we found out? He had severe sleep apnea. He was having almost 70 sleep apnea episodes per hour of his sleep. So, that is so high that I sort of basically put him on treatment right away. And first things he noticed was that his acid reflux was gone.
That's so interesting.
And so you can imagine how this impacts us in very quirky ways that we never even, link or think about. So that day and today, my daughter just turned 12 in March, and he's been using his therapy for last 12 years without pause, So, hey, that was a personal story.
Yeah, no, and it's so interesting because it's like you would think that the acid is causing this, but it's reversed. So it's just so interesting to really what we think and versus what the actual reality of it is. And it's important. So that's why these conversations are so important, because so many people are listening are probably realizing this on, for themselves. And yeah, I think we've all been around someone who snores so loud. It's wild. I went on a trip with friends years ago. I mean, this was a good almost 10 years ago. And you're saying that story, and all I could think about was how someone on the trip snored so loud we can hear on the bottom floor of the house from upstairs. We had to make sure that this person had their own room. No one could sleep near them. And it's like a lot of people might not even know that they're doing that if you're not sleeping next to someone or sleeping in a house with people. So it's interesting. And I think it's important for people who notice this in someone to tell them, because you don't know what you're doing when you're sleeping half the time.
And Leila, it makes you a very less attractive partner, right? If you're like, hey, if you're in a dating game, in that world, if you're found out you're snoring super loud and not taking care of yourself,
yeah,
it's hard, sleep is precious, and we have to, sort of fight to preserve, especially in this attention economy where everyone wants your attention and we're always on our screen. Sleep gets discounted a lot.
Absolutely. And disrupted. People fall asleep holding their phones and all these different things. And I'm sure we'll talk about this in a future episode too about, sleep hygiene at night and ways to make sure that, you're getting a better sleep and not using light for a certain amount of times or putting your phone down or things like that. But it's so common, like you said, and I'm guilty of it, half the time too, doom scrolling or falling asleep near my
Hey,
phone.
I'm a sleep physician. I'm guilty too. I'm not gonna lie.
We all do it.
Hey, it's just crazy how these guys have our psychology
Oh, yeah.
really figured out.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm excited for all the future episodes because there's, I think, so much to dive into. And well, this has been the first episode of the Hidden Sleep Disorder Show with Dr. Saini. I think I'm so excited about the show because I feel like I'm learning so much and I'm so intrigued by all of this now. But, if you're listening or you've ever felt exhausted despite really getting what seems like a full night of sleep, today's conversation is an important reminder that sleep problems are not always simple. And sometimes the real issue is a sleep disorder that hasn't even been diagnosed yet. So if you found this episode helpful, be sure to follow the show so you don't miss the upcoming conversations. And if you know someone who constantly struggles with sleep or unexplained fatigue, or now that we know, loud snoring, you consider sharing this episode with them. Make sure that you share it with someone who can use it and learn from it. And thanks for everyone who's listening or watching this first episode of the Hidden Sleep Disorder Show with Dr. Saini. Thank you so much. It was great speaking with you, and I cannot wait for the future episodes.
Thank you, Leila.
See you next time.